Hello, this is Yaran from HashLabs. Choosing the right hosting provider for your Bitcoin mining operation is an extremely important decision. In this video, we'll go through 9 factors you should consider when choosing your hosting provider. This is an article we just published on the HashLabs blog. It's about 9 factors you can use to evaluate when choosing a hosting provider. So, choosing a hosting provider is one of the most important decisions you will ever make as a Bitcoin miner. You have machines worth hundreds of thousands of dollars or even millions that you're sending to someone else to manage them on your behalf. That requires you have to trust that person. And if you make a mistake and choose the wrong hosting provider, you can in the worst case lose all your machines. That has happened before in this industry. So it's extremely important to use a framework when choosing your hosting provider. So let's go through it. The first factor you should look at is their track record and credibility. So as I said, you're literally sending thousands of dollars, if even millions of dollars worth of your capital to someone else. That means the most important thing you have to know is their credibility, that they actually will be able to manage this machine on your behalf. So let's look. The most important thing about track record and credibility is that you need to feel deep down that you can trust these people to safeguard your machines. And that trust should be grounded in both research and intuition. So I like to use my own gut feeling. Most of the time, I deep down know what is the right thing to do, but it's a different question whether I'm actually doing that right thing. So you have to trust your gut feeling and just operate and do what it tells you to do, basically. But you also need, of course, to do research to build that gut feeling of trust. So how do you research? First step is check reviews. Start with Google and Trustpilot. Positive reviews help, but dig deeper. Some reviews can be fake or outdated. This is a very important starting point. If someone has very bad reviews, you should for sure not do any deals with them. But good reviews is not enough. You should look for third-party mentions. Are they cited in credible sources, client testimonials, or industry articles? If there is a complete lack of visibility, it's a warning sign. You should never do a deal with anyone who has no visibility online. Especially in these days when scammers just appear out of nowhere and create some fake profiles and try to trick you to send them money. You need to check if they have some history online. Another thing is to research the team behind that company. If no names are listed on their website, that's a big red flag. You should verify the people's background and online presence. What have these people been doing before they started in Bitcoin mining hosting? If they have done nothing spectacular or nothing particular, you should probably question their credibility that they can do this for you. Another point, you can ask around. If you know someone who has worked with them before, you should definitely ask them. And just in general, review their track record. Get on a call with them, ask them what they built, for who, and how they handled challenges. So after all this research, you still have a positive gut feeling about the company and the people behind it, you can check this box. Then they have passed factor 1, track record and credibility. And it's extremely important to actually do this research because, as I said, you have to trust your gut feeling. But if your gut feeling is just based on the feeling itself, then you cannot really trust it. The gut feeling has to be based on this research that you have made. So don't forget to do this research. Factor number 2 is the hosting fee. And what most people do wrong is that they put this factor of the hosting fee above the track record and credibility. They just think, oh, if this person has a low hosting fee, they are the best operator, I should work with them. That's not how it works. That you should, under no circumstances, no matter how cheap the hosting fee, work with someone who doesn't have a good track record and credibility. So yeah, once they pass this test of track record, you can go to the factor 2, which is hosting fee. So as I said, track record is more important. But again, there is no point investing in Bitcoin mining if the price per kilowatt hour erodes your returns. So as a benchmark, hosting in the US, which is the most stable market in the world, the most developed market, it currently averages around 7.5 cents per kilowatt hour for small-scale clients. So that means that rates outside the US should generally be a bit lower to reflect higher risk or cheaper power. But do understand that low hosting rates can also be a pitfall. They may reflect inexperience, weak finances, or unsustainable pricing. So if a provider is cheaper than the average, you should strive to understand why. The rule is simple: avoid the highest rates, but don't automatically chase the lowest. Look for a fair, sustainable price from a provider you trust. Factor number 3, upfront capital requirements. So another mistake many newcomers make is that they look too much on the hosting rate, and they might forget that a hosting rate might only be low because you have to invest significant upfront. So in that case, you basically prepay for the kilowatt hours. So the hosting rate will look lower just because you paid for it upfront. But this is a holistic overview you have to make. And some providers, or most providers, charge a deposit, so that's 1 to 2 months of hosting fees. That is to protect the hosting provider against non-payment, basically. Anything beyond a 1-month deposit should not be necessary. Prepayment. Some hosting providers bill after the month, others before the month. Paying after the month frees up capital, but the difference is not that big. CapEx. Larger projects may involve setup or infrastructure fees, often billed per megawatt. This should be viewed as prepaid hosting costs, and a lower ongoing rate should compensate. So what I like to do is to compare offers, is to divide the total CapEx by the kilowatt hours you will consume over the contract term to find your effective rate. I will show you how to do that. So let's say you have 1 megawatt, that's 1000 kilowatt hours, consumed over 24 hours. And let's say you have 365 days in a year and 3-year contract, that's 26 million kilowatt hours you will consume. And we can multiply that by 0.98, let's say 98% uptime. It doesn't really make a big difference. But 25.8 million kilowatt hours you will consume. And if you pay $100,000 in CapEx for that, that's equivalent to about 0.4 cents per kilowatt hour. But remember, and you have to basically add this to the fee per kilowatt hour you pay. But remember, this is upfront capital. So you have to take into account the time value of money. So I would even multiply this by 50% to account for that time value of money. And it's also not sure that you will actually consume all these kilowatt hours. So that's why I multiply it by 50%. So you see here, $100,000 per megawatt in CapEx in a 3-year hosting contract is equivalent to about 0.6 cents per kilowatt hour in higher fee per kilowatt hour. So just be aware of that. Factor number 4 is billing precision and verifiability. So this is one of the most overlooked aspects of hosting. You pay per kilowatt hour consumed, but very many providers don't bill precisely based on actual usage. So what is very common in the industry, even among some of the largest hosting providers in the world, is to charge the clients upfront, assuming 100% uptime, and then once the month is over, they reconcile the bill, and they only give credit for partial downtime. So, for example, some very big hosting providers, they might give credits only after 5% downtime has happened, or even 10%. So that basically means that 7.5 cent per kilowatt hour deal, if you have 5% downtime in a month, a fee per kilowatt hour of 7.9 cent per kilowatt hour. This is significantly raising your cost, and you have to take this into account. So yeah. So at Hash Labs, clients prepay assuming 100% uptime, and then we credit based on any shortfall. So if uptime is 90%, we give the clients a 10% refund. And we believe that that's the transparent way to operate. Another thing to be aware of is that most sites for cooling and lighting in your bill. So for example, a power usage effectiveness of 1.03 means that 3% additional consumption on the site aside from just the machines. That is fair, it's very normal, and that can be early with you as a client. Finally, your hosting bill should always be verifiable. The provider should share the data behind your invoice. If they don't do that, that's unprofessional and a red flag. Billing precision and verifiability are critical. Many investors lose money simply because they don't check how their bills are calculated. Remember, you're dealing with someone here who have an incentive economically to bill you as much as possible. So you need to have the ability to verify that they're not overcharging you. And that is common in this industry. Factor number 5, communication and transparency. So in a perfect world, you'd never need to contact your hosting provider after signing the contract. They will just plug in your machines, give you 100% uptime, everything will work perfectly, never overcharge you, no machines need repair, etc. But in reality, this does not really happen. Questions and issues will arise, and when they do, responsiveness and transparency are key. So a professional hosting provider should have a structured support system, ideally through a ticketing platform and not just direct Telegram chats. Private messaging may feel personal, but it doesn't scale and it often signals a small or immature operation. Providers should reply within 24 hours at most, and ideally sooner, and they should proactively communicate about events that affect uptime or billing. Before signing, ask about their support process, average response time, and how urgent cases are handled. Factor number 6 is access and monitoring. Access to your miners determines how much control and transparency you have, but it's a balance. Full VPN access is rare and is usually impractical. If every client had that level of control, site operations would quickly become unstable. So the next best thing is access through this provider's miner management software, letting you view hash rate and machine status safely. Many professional providers offer a client dashboard showing uptime, energy use, and billing. Direct access matters more if you manage miners for others or run complex setups. For most investors, what counts is transparency and reliability, that your machines run, data is accurate, and communication is open when issues arise. So this is not something you need, but it's a big plus if you can get it. Factor number 7, delivery timeline. Speed matters in mining. Every month your machines are offline is a month of missed revenue. Getting miners online quickly is critical for maximizing returns. That said, delays are quite common, especially for larger deployments. Building infrastructure, setting up power connections, and importing equipment all take time. Here is the key. You should be wary of providers who claim there will be no delays. That is unrealistic. Delays happen. The key is knowing whether your provider handles them transparently. So you should ask them, have they faced delays before? How long were these delays? And lastly, Does the timeline they give you for connection of your machines include a margin of error, or is it a best case scenario? So if it's indeed a best case scenario, you know that there could be some delays. They should include some margin of error in the timeline they give you. Factor number 8, regulatory and jurisdictional risk. So honestly, the regulatory and jurisdictional risk factor is often overestimated in Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is still a young, lightly regulated industry, and in many countries, even lawyers can't fully define what's legal or not. So that uncertainty is part of the business. You're always taking some regulatory and jurisdictional risk. What matters is understanding it and ensuring your provider can manage it. The bigger your operation, the more important this becomes. Large-scale investors should ensure compliance and assess the stability of local regulations. It's also worth remembering that lower hosting rates often reflect higher jurisdictional risk. So this trade-off is baked in. To achieve low costs, you often must accept some risk. Just do so with a provider who understands the local environment and can. The reason why I say that the regulatory and jurisdictional risk factor is often overestimated is because, in my opinion, I believe that the track record and credibility of the specific host matters much more than what country the machines are hosted in. So, as I said, the US is the world's safest country for Bitcoin mining. But remember, hosting scams and horrible performance from hosting providers have happened many times in America. And many people have gotten their machines stolen in America because they sent them to the wrong hosting provider. At the same time, people are very afraid of sending their machines to developing countries. But as long as they do so with a good partner, I don't think I think it can be worth it, to be honest. So don't just disregard one country just because you heard that it's risky. No, you should look more into it and know that if you do things with the right partner, it can actually make sense. Because since so many people are overestimating this risk, then it means that hosting rates can be much lower in one country than another. So this is how you can find the lowest hosting rates if you just go to a developing country or a country where not so many other people want to mine, and you find the best hosting provider in that country who you actually believe can manage this risk. So don't put too much emphasis on which country you are mining in. But of course, it's still an important factor. The risk of something going wrong in Ethiopia or other developing countries is definitely much higher than in the United States or Norway or some other developed country. Factor number 9 is legal protections. This is also a factor that is coming quite down on my list, to be honest, because as long as you have chosen a reputable provider, you will likely never even need to look on the contract after. However, your contract should still give reasonable protection through clear terms and an enforceable jurisdiction. Contract enforcement can be expensive and slow, especially in developing countries. For small clients, the cost of legal action often outweighs the potential recovery. That's why this factor ranks lower. For large multi-megawatt investors, however, strong legal safeguards are essential. When reviewing a contract, focus on the clauses that matter the most. But recognize that many providers rely on standardized templates. Also check the governing law. Jurisdictions like the US, EU, or Singapore offer stronger protection. So this is also why HashLabs use Singapore law. Ultimately, legal protections are about limiting downside. It's not about eliminating risk. The best defense is still working with a trustworthy provider so you never need to enforce anything in court. So just remember, if you have never been in a legal case before, I can tell you that it's quite expensive and it's often not worth it, to be honest. So you have to, again, work with someone you can trust. Then you don't really need all these legal protections. But the bigger your operations, the more important this factor is. So it's still a factor here, but it's definitely not the most important. So the conclusion here is that choosing a hosting provider is one of the most consequential decisions in Bitcoin mining. The cheapest rate or fastest promise rarely tells the whole story. What really matters is reliability, transparency, and trust. By carefully evaluating these 9 factors, you can greatly reduce your risk and improve the long-term stability of your operation. So here you can see the illustration with all the 9 factors. And before you look on hosting investment, you should look on this illustration and go through each factor one by one. And basically, to add to the conclusion, the most important thing is just choosing some good people you want to work with. That's the most important factor of all. It's the track record and credibility of the hosting provider. And after that, you can evaluate everything else. If the provider is not, I would say, good people and someone you want to work with, someone you can trust, then you should not just write them off the list and don't do business with them. So that's the 9 factors to evaluate when choosing a provider. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe, and see you next time.